What is good, my ex-homies? It's your boy Jacob Gooden, and we are back for another week in the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. Today, I am joined by my brand new friend, Charlie Monroe, who, aside from being a homeschool alum, is a licensed family therapist and a former youth pastor. He's going to talk all about growing up in rural Michigan, the role that religion played in his homeschool experience, being right smack dab in the middle of 6 kids, and let's just say his experience is anything but conventional. So he's bringing his own deep insights, not only from his personal stuff, but also from his work in family therapy and working with some modern homeschool families. So if that's you, if you're unpacking your past and thinking about the future of homeschooling, this episode is a must listen. I'm going to shut up now and turn it over to past me. Charlie, we're here. We're in the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. Welcome to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club, my friend.
It's good to finally be here.
Well, we got connected through Instagram. Actually, I think I liked one of your Instagram reels about being a homeschool kid and playing with Legos.
Yeah.
And yeah, we ended up just kind of DMing, and it took us a little while to actually like get on a call and chat, but I'm glad we did. And so we're here today, and I'm stoked because you're going to share your homeschool experience with the audience. So I don't want to sugarcoat it too much more other than that. I'm going to hand it over to you, but could you just like walk us through kind of set the stage, if you will, for your homeschool experience? How long were you homeschooled? Siblings, where do you sit in the sibling lineup, and then maybe like what a typical kind of like day looked like at the house?
Yeah. So I grew up in the country, so dirt roads, and we were a rural homeschool family, so we weren't part of co-ops for most of my time. And I was homeschooled K through 12, so that was my entire upbringing. So we were kind of in the middle of nowhere, and there was 6 kids in the family and an aunt that lived with us for about 15 years, and then my 2 parents. And so household of 9. And so in the kids, I'm about in the middle. We have an adopted older sister, so kind of birth in the middle. But that's definitely the personality type that I took on, was a middle child.
Okay.
And so we were kind of hobby farm people. We had, animals that we would raise to eat and gardens that were raised to, eat through the winter sort of situation. So a lot of that was integrated on day-to-day basis. So if you weren't doing homework and were finished probably about by noon or 1, there was chores to do outside that had to involve animals or the garden or something similar to that as part of the daily routine. So that was kind of the day in the life.
Okay. What kind of animals do you guys have on the farm?
Pretty much everything that wasn't considered a large animal.
Okay.
So sheep, goats. We did have a couple pigs and mostly chickens and turkeys and like a couple odd ducks or 2 here and there. I think we dabbled in every small animal at one point.
Okay. Yeah. My mom always wanted chickens. She begged and begged and begged for chickens. Never happened. We had friends who had chickens and goats and things like that. Our backyard just lended itself more to the garden. So I understand that when you're talking about, yeah, okay, we had responsibilities in the garden. Totally feel that. My whole responsibility upbringing was like, you maintain the lawn and a lot of the garden,
Yep.
take care of those things, and like, we'll be good. Get you outside a little bit, get some sun. So I'm curious because 1 of 6 kids. I would classify that as a large homeschool family. I'm 1 of 2.
Yeah.
So like that role of like being a middle child, my family doesn't have that. We've got the oldest and we got the youngest. So like, what does that look like to you, or how do you envision like middle kid status? Like, what is that personality like?
Yeah, and it varies a lot. And I mean, personality archetypes
Right.
only go so far. But like my next oldest sibling was 5 years older than me, and then the next youngest was 3 years. So there was like an 8-year gap that I sat in between.
Right.
So like with that, like I was the youngest for a long time. Then I was the middle of 2 kind of different groups of children that were closer in age, and then I was the oldest when they got out of the house.
Hmm.
So like the role, I would say, shifted. I
Okay.
think the younger years was much more like trying to battle to be part of the older kids because you're so much younger. I mean, the oldest sibling's 9 years older than me,
Yeah.
so there's quite a gap there. But then after that, it was more of kind of a older child.
Yeah.
Was probably more my teenage years.
Okay.
So
Makes sense.
um, yeah, so I kind of had to flow between roles.
Yeah. That's so interesting because yeah, I'm the oldest, not only just like kid in my family, but then also like grandkid on both sides. So like
Mm,
I know I have always and will always sit in that like first kid mentality of like everything's got to be perfect and like it's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. But like I know that like
yeah.
I know my role in the family is like firstborn, but I also get to make the argument that like I'm the favorite because I was the first, um, even though that's not true. But
Hmm.
you know, it's I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to mess with the rest of the family when it comes to
Yeah.
that stuff. So, okay, so you also brought up that you guys didn't participate in like co-ops in the area or anything like
Hmm.
that. So, was your homeschooling experience really isolated then, or did you have other friends you just didn't really do much together in regards to school?
Yes, I would characterize it as isolating,
Okay.
100%. Um, Especially the middle school, early high school years. I'd say there would be about 3 years in there that were um, particularly isolating. And I joined a co-op later in the years, and like the reasons why we were in one, I'm sure that um, the articulated reasons would vary today compared to probably what was said back then, but we just weren't involved in one. We did play homeschool basketball, but that was like two practices a week as the season started, and then no practices and then games until about February. And so you kind of ran from November to February in that. And then you had friends at church,
Yeah.
and we were a pretty religious family. Our motivation for homeschool was primarily religious,
Okay.
um, which is a little bit of the exception to the norm, kind of. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's where friendships came from, and that was about it.
Yeah. I think a lot of us can relate. My mom involved me in co-ops from like pretty much day one, but we were a part of a Christian home educating system in Ventura
Hmm.
County. But yeah, a lot of friends. We went to church together, and then we were doing some school together, and like very much just kind of. I remember feeling a little isolated, but I think that
Hmm.
also had to stem from I did 2 years of public school right off the rip. So kindergarten, first grade was public
Oh,
school.
okay.
So second grade was the transition, and that kind of tends to like I think I just was in the mindset of like I'm gonna see my friends every day, and then that wasn't a reality. So even though I saw my friends on the regular,
Hmm.
it just wasn't the same. But if you never had that, like that's just normal, you know? It's just normal to like have only siblings and only parents, and we see friends at church on Sunday, and um,
Hmm.
not that it's not isolating, but just um, I don't know. I think I had a little bit of that like expansive not expansive mind, but I had a little bit of that experience, and so I could pull from like, okay, I know that this isn't like 100% normal.
And I think another part of it that was isolating is I was probably the only extrovert in the family.
Okay,
So that definitely lended towards, I think, a different experience.
right. Yeah, I'm married to an extrovert. I'm an ambivert, so I'm like 50-50. So
Hmm.
I have my moments, but yeah, we need people, and yeah, I'm curious too, like with like you being in the middle of so many kids, the like ways that like your parents managed that, because obviously there was a big gap, so maybe it was kind of a little bit easier where like some of the olders were more independent by the time the youngers were in the family. But like my mom only had to manage two students, and we were 3 years apart, so like
Hmm.
there was a difference. But like two students is a lot different than six students, and so she wasn't having to like the curriculum wasn't really that much different. Uh, and then once we got older, it was very much like we're handling our own stuff. I have friends from bigger families who the older kids at a point were teaching the younger kids how to read and write and do
Hmm.
math and those types of things. So, did your family operate like that, or were you guys more kind of like independent, or what? I don't know. Like, walk me through that.
Yeah, it was, I think, independence for sure.
Okay.
I don't have many memories of my older siblings, but I do know that like I mean, by the time I was 6, my oldest sibling was 15, and by high school we were all independently functioning. So we would have the textbook, we would read it, we would do the stuff. My mom would check it if she needed to. Sometimes there wasn't stuff to do. Sometimes it was just reading the chapter sort of thing. And like, so the involvement in that level was very low because it didn't have to be, which was probably the greatest strength that came from homeschooling was that independent functioning. So, I mean, I got one-on-one attention from my mom for those early years,
Mhm.
uninterrupted,
Yeah.
and my homeschooling experience wasn't going to be 5, 6 hours a day. It was going to be more like 2.5, 3,
Yeah.
so it was a very short amount of time in comparison.
You also brought up like religion playing a big part in your homeschool experience and maybe being a big catalyst for why you guys homeschooled.
Yeah.
Did that play itself into the curriculum as well, being very like Christian curriculum, evolution is bad?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. It stood out to me one day because you don't really like when you find the word or words to describe your experience for the first time, it makes you understand it better. And I remember I was reading a therapy intake form for myself, and I asked the question, was your religious upbringing rigorous?
Okay.
And I was like, yes, absolutely was. That is the best word to date. It was a rigorous religious training system. There was always scripture, always a Christian ideal, always the God's way interpretation of circumstances integrated into everything almost all the time. Not just in the curriculum, but also in like the normal conversations of the day to day in the household.
Okay.
And Family Life Radio is on, and TCT is on the TV, and just like that, it's rigorous.
I can agree with you that like I didn't always view mine as like super rigorous, and I wouldn't. My parents, even today, like if you ask my mom, the reason she homeschooled, not exclusively religious reasons. She didn't really care for
Hmm.
the the school situation in the town we moved to in second grade. My grandma had been nagging her about homeschooling, and she was like, "Oh, let's just like give it a shot. Like, I think maybe I could do this. I have some experience teaching, like, kind of a deal." And so, while her reasons weren't exclusively religious, we were a religious family, so it just kind of bled itself into it. And we were in a
Hmm.
religious environment with Ventura, and we were part of the Association of Christian Home Educators of Ventura County, which was like that was the thing. That was if you wanted homeschool co-op, if you wanted support in this arena, like you were that or that. Like that was your option. And so I I think until I was an adult, I don't know that I would have classified it as like super rigorous or super just like always there, but it really was. And now
Hmm.
as like an adult, I'm like sitting here going, it was in every textbook. It was in everything we did.
Yes.
And that's so interesting when I now talk to people who were not homeschooled or even who were but didn't have that religious aspect, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we didn't like study Bible verses or we learned about like evolution and things
Hmm.
like that." And I'm like, "What?" Like, does that shock you ever where you're just kind of like, "What does that even look like? Can you comprehend that at all?"
I mean, I ended up substitute teaching for 3 years
Okay.
as part of my career in the past, and so like for me, it's all very normal, and now that feels much more, and even like college too. It's just like those conversations are much more normal and make sense
Mhm.
in the way that we did education in some capacities does not make a whole lot of sense to me now.
Yeah. So you brought up college. Let's kind of talk about that transition then from the homeschool world to the college world, and like, was it immediate? Like, hey, I'm graduating, 18. I'm
Hmm.
going to college. Did you take some gap years? Did you graduate early? Like, and how was getting into college? Because like I know for me it wasn't an issue. Like I had transcripts, I held the
Hmm.
whole deal. But I know I've had previous guests on who they're like, my parents didn't keep any type of anything, so getting into college was like its own battle. But what did that
Mm.
look like for you?
My parents were very organized and thought of those things ahead of time, so that wasn't an issue. I think that was the biggest anxiety of my later high school years was would I get in, but would I be able to perform?
Okay.
Because you have no comparison model for how intelligent you are. You
Hmm.
have your handful of friends, and if they happen to be better at you than other things, you don't know if you're just dumb or incompetent, or you just maybe the lower end of these like select group of people. And so you just have no idea. And back then the ACT was what I took instead of the SAT. And my ACT score was decently high enough that it was like, okay, I'm not an idiot, and now I know that, but will I still be able to perform in school? And that first semester was very difficult. And very difficult in the sense of like I just had no knowledge of things that were considered commonplace. Like my first English class um, was a nightmare. I mean, they told me all these things you should probably know before you're in this class, and I've never heard of any of them in my entire life.
No.
And learning what like logical arguments had to be structured as, like how to write a paper. Like, thankfully, I was a very like avid reader, so that translated. But my major was heavy paper writing
Right.
and very low test taking. So I had to put out a lot of that kind of content, and that was I'd never done that before.
Yeah.
And I'd never had to form relationships with professors or use services or know what they even were or what to expect from them. And, while some of that is still new for college students who come out of the high school experience, there's at least a base concept of what that can look like. And so, yeah, first semester was stressful.
I'm with you on the college services thing. Like I didn't realize there was like tutors and stuff. And I didn't have to pay them.
Yeah.
I just had to like show up, or like office hours, like
Yeah.
professor office hours. I was like I didn't understand. I was like, "Oh, well, I don't want to bother them." It's like, "No, this is time they literally set aside to like just talk to you about whatever it is that you're struggling with." Cool.
Hmm.
You know. And once I figured that out, once that clicked in my brain, I was like, I can do this, like I got this, I can ask the dumb questions and I'm
Yep.
so thankful. I don't know about you. I was like pretty awkward my first semester. I didn't want anybody
Hmm.
to know I was homeschooled. So I just told people I went to private school. But I also was really awkward. And I had a professor who sat me down. I was in her office for office hours. And she goes, Jacob, you have to learn to like chill. Like you just got to be cool with like who's in the room. I wanted to work in the music industry. She's like, that's the thing. If you want to be in the music industry, you just have to know how to like be there and be cool. And you're like the guy in the room, but you like just shut up. Basically, was like kind
Yeah.
of it was the nice way of her being like, just shut up and just like sit in the room and be cool. Like that's it. Um, so was that like I don't know. Did you have any of that social weirdness where you're like, okay, I'm learning things really, really fast, like, but or not really. You were an extrovert, so maybe it wasn't a problem for you.
I think there was definitely some self-awareness, but I think my nervousness quieted me at first more,
Okay,
and then I became a lot more open and outgoing than I would say it's the second year. The conversation I had from a professor was like, he was like, you need to speak less harshly and confidently about your opinions in class because you are unintentionally shutting other people out of the conversation who just don't want to challenge what you just said,
interesting.
which then the discourse doesn't like continue. And I was very that surprised me. I've never felt like an aggressive person, and I've never been described that way or like dominating. But apparently, in some classes, if I was talking about certain particular topics, I could be very opinionated,
Yeah,
and that was kind of that learning curve for me.
I had a professor. I went to a Christian college, so talk about the Christian upbringing.
Same,
I just carried that with me right into college. I was like, I kind of wanted that youth group experience to just kind of continue.
because you
So
went to Greenville, right?
I did. I went to Greenville University,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah. Which college did you go to again? I'm blanking.
Spring Arbor,
Spring Arbor. Okay, so yeah, kind of similar.
very
sister
similar.
sister schools.
Hmm.
So I mean, yeah, we had like I don't know about you guys. We had like lifestyle agreement. We had all these things that there was like the do
Oh
not
yeah,
do list. We had like
yeah.
girls can only come over to your dorm certain days for certain hours. Four on the
Yep.
floor. Everybody would talk about four on the
Hmm.
floor. Like yeah, there was all that. But I had a professor who we took a religions class, and the first day he was just asking us all these questions about like, you know, do you believe that like this story in the Bible is true? And then like discuss, right? And you have a bunch of Christian kids in there, like they're gonna be opinionated, like you're talking about. They're gonna be very like set, and they're
Yeah.
like, "This is 100% true. The Bible says it." And then he would just ask why. He would just be like that annoying little kid who's just like the answer is never
Hmm.
good enough. It's just always why, what, And he's like, when you want to tap out, you just say Jesus. Like that's the answer to everything. At the end of the day, just say Jesus. That's your tap out,
Hmm.
kind of a thing. But to your point of like somebody would come in and say something that it was like I'm not talking to them anymore because like there is no discussion. They are so set in what they believe.
Correct.
Um, how how did that soften for you? Like, was that like hard to kind of like soften that down for you, or were you kind of like, or was it an instant like, okay, I think I get it. Like, I think I can see it.
Yeah, that could be a very long and complicated story. Um, the short answer is yes, that has all softened quite a bit,
Mhm.
and it did pretty quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily why that was easier for me or more of my go-to. I think I just found like the arguments of my upbringing, the classic fundamental evangelicalism. I just guess I found it to be wanting in
Hmm.
the scholarship space of the university, especially since I majored in like ministry and psych. It just a lot of those assumptions and like presented facts got challenged very quickly.
Right.
And then some of those were slow bleeds over the course of, a decade later,
Yeah.
changing my mind to some things. But yeah.
So was the intention? I was gonna ask you what your degree was, but was the intention then to like do something in ministry as a career?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the explicit intention.
Okay. And did you end up going
Hmm.
in ministry and doing that for
I
a while?
did.
Okay.
Yeah. I did 7 years of youth ministry. Uh, Loved it.
Hmm.
We were very successful in that process. But yeah, I mean, continuation of that conversation, as time went on, I moved farther and farther away from the evangelical mindset
Hmm.
and belief system,
Hmm.
which eventually led in this whole dramatic leaving,
Yeah.
because I didn't believe enough things that I should anymore.
Right.
It resulted in me being told that I had to leave, yeah, which was a whole dramatic situation.
Yeah. I can. I can imagine. I also walked away
Yeah.
from religion. Just kind of was that slow burn of like. I think I don't. I call it like an unraveling for me. Like it was like once one thing kind of got pulled, once the thread of like one thing got
Hmm.
pulled. Like an example I give a lot of times is like the story of Noah and like the legitimacy of it and like is it a parable or is it history, right? And if it's also
Yeah.
history, to what scope is it reality? Was it the whole world? Was it a section of the world? And once I started to like question that, I kind of pulled I just kept pulling that thread and
Hmm.
I it was kind of my undoing in a lot of ways, but in a good way. Like I don't regret it, but it's interesting to look at that and be like, okay, that was kind of this start for this whole thing of starting to be like questioning the legitimacy of everything in the Bible and everything that my pastors had told me and starting to look at
Hmm.
like other things. So now I sit in a place of like I still think I'm kind of spiritual and I still pull aspects of the Bible and I think that they're good and healthy and um, you know, examples of being just a good human being. But my overall power source, if you will, my higher being is no longer a god. It's just
Yeah.
humanity. It's just the shared experience of humanity. And so um, it's funny how people go to Christian colleges and then I feel like you either go way further into it or that unraveling happens.
Yeah, it does. And I just think like I think those places would have a lot more happy alumni 10 years later if there had been more nuance integrated
Mhm.
into the belief system. I think a lot of us come away and we see the hard line, like very literal fundamentalistic thought processes is just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Disrespectfully using that word, but just absolutely ridiculous as you learn more and time goes on that you just can't really have a lot of faith in much else that's being said, which is kind of the probably the not fair part.
Okay.
But if someone had come along and had admitted the complexity or the struggles of scripture, much less just Christian morals and ethics, I think as an adult you'd have a little more respect, at least, for that individual and belief system, rather than now this kind of like get me as far away from this as possible sort of feeling that you have now in your system once you kind of get out of it. So,
Things are just a lot more gray than I think we were raised to
hmm
believe. The black and white tendency
100%.
is just it's an interesting one. I had a conversation with a friend not that long ago, and we were talking about the binary of just the world we exist in, um, and
hmm
they are a non-binary person, and so it was interesting to like talk to them, and they were even pushing back on me talking about like good versus bad and like things like that. And they're like, that's just like that's your opinion. But you're also still putting that like black and white label on things. I'm like sitting here going like, oh my god, my brain hurts from like trying to think like this because it's just been years and years and years of always thinking it's like it's yes or it's no, it's black or it's white. Like it's one of those things.
Yeah.
And when you get to that place of like being able to be like, okay, no, there's a whole spectrum of gray in the middle of that. That's I argue that's where the fun begins because you're like there's just so many things that like you can explore and embrace and
hmm
enjoy and ask questions about, and we don't need to feel guilty about asking those questions anymore. At least I don't. That's something I'm working on. It's like not feeling the guilt to be like I can ask these questions and pursue something that's just different than what I was brought up to believe.
Yeah. You're no longer plagued by the constant thought or fear, am I doing the wrong thing
Hmm.
or the right thing? And like you said, thinking in black and white. Yeah. So yes to everything you just said.
Yeah. So after youth ministry, you I'm gonna say step out of that, but you leave that, and
I did.
some
Yeah.
maybe not so nice some maybe not so nice ways. But what was the next step? I know like where did you go from there, and where are we today?
A couple places, I think vocationally and then mentally. So I had during that time frame of youth ministry, and my last 4 years of youth ministry were like my most successful years by far,
Hmm.
which is why it was such an abrupt and harsh ending. And like the big piece that ended up being the final straw was once I expressed what was the word uncertainty around the interpretation of the scriptures around the LGBTQIA community.
Okay.
That's when they were like,
Yeah.
"You're out."
Gone.
So that was it. So I shifted during that time. I was getting my license to be a therapist. I was going to school. I kind of seen the writing on the wall a little bit that I wasn't going to be in here forever,
Okay.
and thank God, just truly like that I did because I would have had very little to fall back on. So I immediately hopped into that after that whole thing was done, and that's been about 3 years now. And the first place I'd say mentally ended up was a very angry place
Hmm.
in a very like burn this whole whatever this is down sort of situation, and like didn't really have any way to express that. And so thankfully I think kept a lot of that coped with because I was probably in a much more angry place. Tried writing a couple books or chapters. I can't remember the titles, but they had to do with like homeschooling or evangelical experiences. I can't remember. It was some of them were humorous titles, but whatever. Like I was working through it, and
Right.
then as time went on, I kind of ended up more in that gray space of just kind of like trying to burn this down is not worth my time,
Yeah.
and much healthier space now. But yeah, that first year and a half was very angry.
I feel you. A lot of my deconstruction happened, and I was working in a restaurant, and I
Mm.
would work this Saturday morning shift that was 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. And I worked at a barbecue restaurant, so smoking meat,
Oh,
prepping sides, all that kind of stuff. And I would just listen to like theologians and podcasts about like deconstructing and other just views on religion and things like that. And I'm glad I was in a kitchen because I would get angry, like you were talking about. I had this like really solid anger, and I could just take it out on like
yeah,
whipping like potatoes or
yeah,
uh, like salting meat basically, and like punching these big old racks of brisket and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of that like anger, and even this show, the original version of this show was angry. It was very much
Yeah.
like the new tag is like the good, the bad, and the ugly of homeschooling.
Yeah.
The original tag was just the bad and the ugly. It was very much like I just wanted to hear people shit all over their homeschool experience,
Yeah. I
and
totally get that.
it wasn't until I kind of like you start to distance yourself, right, and you kind of calm down after a little
Hmm.
bit, and you go, okay, like maybe not everything was bad. Well, this is my experience. Maybe not everything was bad.
Yeah.
There was some good mixed in there, and let's bring that to the surface as well. You know, we can still talk about the bad and the ugly. We can talk about the things that probably need to change, but let's also not forget that there's funny moments, there's good moments. I learned a lot of stuff, like I still
Yeah. Correct.
felt, and so being able to highlight some of that as well was in there.
Yeah. It wasn't there. Sorry, I was as you were talking, I just had to pull up my working titles that I was
Yes.
talking about, and one of them, the first one is a recovering homeschooler. The death of an evangelical golden boy. That was a little dramatic.
Love that.
The fragility of Christian intellectualism,
Okay.
and 12 reflections on homeschooling was just a short version of that I'd thrown together.
Yeah.
But yeah, those were the working titles. As you can tell, a little aggressive, dramatic
Yeah.
at the
I could
time.
see a New York Times bestseller in there somewhere. Maybe, maybe a little
Yeah,
retooling, but I think it's in there.
yeah, maybe.
So now,
Maybe I'll still write it someday.
yeah. Hey, you've sat with it, maybe you can come back, maybe,
Hmm.
tweak it just a little bit,
A little less
a
harsh.
little less harsh, but, still in there, you still need the call to action at the end of it, what's the
Hmm.
next step for people? So you leave the church, get your license as a therapist,
Yep.
start working in therapy. What specific arena of therapy do you work in?
Yeah, I got into a couple of unique spaces. So through a connection, I got into family therapy with a local community mental health agency and doing their intensive home-based programming. So I go to the family's homes to do therapy. So it's a social work,
Mm-hmm.
typically a social work role, but we are doing therapy within it.
Okay.
Um, so it's not like a CPS role, but a therapist role more in that sense. But I mean, the families we're working with, I mean, 9 out of 10 of them have like CPS involved at some point. So it's kind of that clientele. And in that world, we came across some homeschool families that we worked with as well. Did some private practice, moonlight with some, potentially moonlighting with some in a juvenile facility coming up. But yeah.
Well, so because one of the things you and I chatted about previously was the fact that yeah, you now have like as a therapist been able to work with homeschool families who maybe are transitioning their kids back into
Hmm.
public school or transitioning kids from public school into like a homeschool environment, things like that. But what are you seeing? Because like obviously like I'm 10 years removed from homeschool at this point,
Yeah.
and you're probably about the same. And so like what are we seeing in the homeschool world today? And like what do you I don't know. I guess I'll just leave it at that. What are we seeing
Hmm.
when it comes to that kind of environment now?
And one, I've seen both sides. So I've seen I would say in youth ministry, I saw a lot of very successful homeschool families,
Mhm.
and now in therapy, I've seen a lot of unsuccessful situations. One, I would just say the scope of what is accessible to homeschool families is so radically different
Right.
than it was 10 years ago. I mean, in some instances, you might as well just call it private school because that is probably more of what options, the level of options that now are available. I mean, instead of just one sport, in Michigan, like basketball, you now have like 4 or 5 you can choose
Right.
from, and you can be active in it almost year round. You have co-ops that actually have like educated individuals who are going to present or teach some sort of topic that they're actually like qualified to discuss. And so like start having more accessibility. And granted, this is in a large city. I'm in the capital city of Michigan, so some of that's natural because of the space we're in. So, like, to give homeschooling credit in its current state, there is a lot of options.
Yeah.
But even then, like options like that still typically involve some sort of monetary or social connection. And so, for those who are not successful in it, there still remains a pretty big theme of isolation. And what is making them unsuccessful is a dynamic that I've seen happen in, I would say, pretty much every homeschool family that I have known, both successful and unsuccessful, is one of the dangers is like this emotional this unhealthy emotional enmeshment or reliance on my kids to regulate me.
Okay.
So like you have a lot of time with your kids, which is great. You get close, they're close to you. You kind of get applauded as that as a healthy thing, and it is, clearly. But then like when one person gets upset in that family, everyone is now upset with them. Like there's this kind of enmeshment. Like no one's really emotionally functioning apart from each other a whole lot. So then when that goes south, it goes south very quickly. So when somebody decides that they're going to start performing behaviors in a poor way, it's like not only is it just a behavior of a kid I have to manage, it's now a personal attack. It's now something that is like devastating my identity as a parent, or especially homeschool parents who have a lot of pressure to feel successful. And now and the other siblings are getting pulled down in it. And like this family drama, instead of there being a natural break where the kids go to school for 8 hours a day, it's constantly around you
Right.
all the time. And you don't have separation from that, which means you don't have perspective, you're not getting a break, and then that just goes to a potentially a very bitter place very quickly,
Yeah.
or an apathetic place where you just throw your hands up and I'm like, I'm done,
Yeah.
and we're just going to kind of coexist. And that relationship is getting saved when these kids get out of the home and transition to public school, get some professionals to work with them, because usually when things blow up, school has either been not happening very rarely, or has been happening poorly enough that they're not getting the education they deserve or need. So there's professionals at school working with them, and now mom or dad or both finally have a break and are able to kind of emotionally separate and recover and kind of have some independence from that space. So like when that stuff goes south, I just feel like it goes really south.
To your point, it's like I've had multiple people on the show who we've talked about the difficulty of specifically usually mom, because mom tends to do the majority of the teaching. Dad is out in the
Yeah.
typical format. Dad's working, mom's teaching, and but we've talked about that the separation when kids get older, and like mom still doesn't know how to turn off like the teacher and still kind of has that like
Hmm.
attachment. And so even when like you're in college or you get out of college and your mom is still just kind of like on you about stuff that you're like, mom, I'm not a kid anymore, like I don't need you to be teacher anymore. I know that's a little bit different than what you were describing, but like that's the closest I think I can relate to just that, like that thought process of like, man, your emotions being so intertwined that when little Johnny has a bad day, now mom has a bad day and dad's got a bad day, and there's no, you need that break, right? You need, like you were talking about,
Hmm.
like being able to send a kid away for a few hours a day just to be able to like reset, maybe focus on yourself. That's important. I don't think a lot of homeschool parents know how to do like the self-love thing, like know how to take care of themselves emotionally sometimes.
I think too, like when you have people, and not this is not every situation, but there's definitely a lot of homeschooling parents who one of the motivating factors emotionally is pretty much like an anxious attachment disorder. Like the separation anxiety for them between them and their kid is really high. And then that gets moralized or supported by some, like, I'd never send my kid to daycare because when they're there and they see me, they cry, even though that's such a misinterpretation of the experience. Or like, I wouldn't ever send my kid to public school and be apart from them. They need me. And when the reality is you need them.
Right.
And that's a very big difference. Uh, and a very important perspective to remember is like your kids are actually probably functioning independently from you fine, you know, 9 out of 10 times. You can have a conversation about what is too much and you can try to figure that out. But you kind of have to figure that out by the experience of like how are your kids doing and functioning and developing and how are they relating to other people and yourself. But I think a lot of these individuals, because they are anxiously attached, that gets moralized and that's used as a motivator. And then when that day happens, when kids grow up and they do have to leave, it's really starting to be evident that this was more about the parent than the kid.
Right.
And that becomes a rough experience. And then kids are trying to get away from that sometimes, and they're trying to really get away from that,
Yeah.
which creates a lot of hurt. Like, why do you want to get away from me? Well, it's because you need me to be okay, and then I don't want to fill that role,
Yeah.
and that's not my role, and that's a very oppressive role.
Yeah. My mom and I talk about a lot about her emotional health. Both, actually, both of my parents. But one of the things that we've had to work through together was the fact that she's like, she recognizes that she was not an emotionally healthy person when she started homeschooling and when my sister and I were little kids.
Hmm.
And and so something we've talked about and we've had to like work through and things like that. And she's like, I today, when she talks to parents who are like, I'm thinking about homeschooling. She's like, okay, well, are you emotionally good? I
Yeah.
think to your point, can you live without your kid? Like, are you your
Hmm.
own individual person? Because I don't know that she really was that when she started homeschooling us, and she became that as we
Yeah.
got older. I think she healed a lot, and I don't think that the transition was terrible to adulthood, but
Hmm.
but sh it's been one of those interesting conversations to have with her to kind of be like, okay, like you know that this sucked. Like you've seen that pattern in yourself where you know that like you needed us or you just weren't emotionally good or like whatever the reason was that you were like just you were not 100%, and you would do that's the main thing you would change is you would be like, okay, let me be emotionally in a better place and then we could homeschool, and I think the experience would be drastically better. I had a friend on not that long ago and we were talking about she started homeschooling her kids and then they're now in public or private school. I'm blanking, but the reason she did that was because she realized that she was having issues. She was like, I can't regulate myself. I can't do anything. And they're just here constantly. And I have no alone time and I have no anything. And as soon as they went to school, even though it was hard for her, she started to be like, okay, I'm okay now. And now I can be mom. I can be
Hmm.
the better version of mom. And I can go and advocate for my kids in school and make sure my kids have the best education. And her kids are thriving. They're like geniuses.
Hmm.
To your point about like the moral justification that homeschooling gives, like
Hmm.
where do you think that messaging comes from? And maybe you don't know. I'm I'm interested. Like where do you think that comes from? And then also like there's also this message of like public school is bad and public school is evil. Like I don't know, like and I think homeschool parents get that in their brain if they're like, oh,
Hmm.
I don't want bad for my kids, so like let me take them out and let me remove them from that, and I can do better at home.
Yeah. I mean, the first one, a simple question answer to that is I think some of that is the golden era of history sort of trad life. Um, I'm trying to think of the word for it, but essentially making that sound like it was some perfect, desirable part of human experience
Right.
that we need to go back to. That the one-room schoolhouse was probably the best school experience in North America, and then everything past that sucks. You
Hmm.
know, whatever that, not that it would be said out loud, but that's kind of like the idealization of like Little House on the Prairie era of education, and the family involvement and all those things. I mean, I think there's some like glorification of that comes into it. But I think more of it does come like statistically is like in the 70 percentile, parents will talk about the public school being poor as a reason they homeschool. And I think like that's fair in a lot of circumstances, but it's really important to get detailed on exactly what you mean by that because it can vary as much from like the myth of people using a like cat litter box in the bathroom level of misinformation
Right.
to something as specific as like they feel like the teachers and their ability to articulate certain subjects is just not adequate, or the class is so disruptive that you can't actually concentrate and learn, or you feel like a 8 hour a day, 5 day a week sort of experience in school is not helpful for the development of a child, which is a good argument
Right.
like in itself. Like it's I personally do not love the pace and length of school for kids. Just in my experience, I don't think it's the right pace and time frame. but a lot of times, like people I talk to do not have those specific details.
Right.
It's some more abstract thought process of my kid's going to become a druggie or they're going to get bullied, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, by the way. We can talk about that. Like, or like they're going to get pregnant or they're going to start doing these things that are very destructive. They're going to ruin their life, and they can usually hodgepodge pick some examples. But I can also hodgepodge pick some examples out of homeschool communities too. It's like people are people wherever they go, and the differences and like what you're gonna have to deal with in a large concentration of kids is gonna be different, correct? But you're not gonna escape problems, or and kids are gonna find their way to do things they want to do. Like I know so many homeschoolers that are very young and having sex behind their parents' backs because they want to and they're gonna find it.
Right.
Like it's just you're not gonna escape it.
Yeah.
So if that's what you think is gonna happen, I would say you need to wake up a little bit. I think if you're more of like concerned about the education format, I think I can get behind that a little bit. But also like one of the things to that bullying thing that I've noticed is like some emotional immaturity that comes out of homeschooling, particularly in my experience as an individual as well. Like I did not have the capacity to deal with conflict or people who were wrong or being mean because I hadn't dealt with it.
Hmm.
And then you're 19 and you're getting hit with this for the first time and you're kind of getting absolutely destroyed emotionally because you have no thick skin
Right.
and you have no coping skill. You haven't developed a pattern for this, and it's just blowing your mind. And then you can either become, a fawner where you have to try to make everybody happy because if someone's angry with you, you deserved it. Potentially that was your upbringing growing up, or like you decide to go on the attack and you just decide you need to go like full into this attack mode because you don't realize potentially the lack of seriousness or the nuance of this whatever is happening. And so bullying absolutely sucks, and I'm not talking about extreme bullying. I'm just talking about like dealing with rough people or conflict or people who are trying to be mean is not always the worst thing in the world for kids to learn how to deal with as they grow up.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I was having a conversation with my wife last night, literally, about the fact that, like, I put this shit on YouTube.
Yeah.
That part of putting this show out is that it is open to criticism. It is open to people being mean on the internet. And as we know, as history has shown us, the internet is not a nice place.
Mm-mm.
And I've received some nasty messages and I've received some nasty things and some pushback. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's like it's somebody who you can actually like be like, okay, we can have a conversation about this and it can be productive, right? And we can maybe come to a middle ground somewhere. And other people just want to be mean to be mean.
Hmm.
Because of my upbringing, I don't really remember being bullied. I maybe have a little bit of a thicker skin than somebody who was truly isolated and only exclusively in their home
Yeah.
for most of their upbringing. But I'm having to learn that tough skin reality today, where it's just like,
Yeah.
people are going to say mean stuff, and it's what you do with it and how you hold on to it that's like important. It's like, you know, does this hold any weight? If not, like, just you got to let it go, let it roll off your back. It's not, you know, it's not targeted at you. They're a really unhappy person. And
Hmm.
that's what I keep reminding myself. Is I'm like, people who are just mean to be mean, they're not a happy person. They're not living their best life.
Yeah.
And I'm out here, and I'm overall, I think I'm a pretty happy person, and I'm living a
Yeah.
pretty good life. So, um, I just have to remind myself of that sometimes. Of like, but yeah, to your point, extreme bullying, absolutely not. I think parents need to step in for that. But the
Yeah.
real world slaps you upside the head sometimes. Sometimes you get hit with that harsh reality of. I mean, I brought up college professor told me to just basically shut up, like
Hmm.
learn to be cool. That stung. That was not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I you got to learn how to deal with that not only in the moment but afterwards.
Yeah.
And there are I guarantee there are homeschool families that are isolated that just for whatever reason, personality disposition, just are unbothered individuals. I'm sure that exists.
Yeah.
I run into that rarely. I run into much more of a sensitive child because of the isolation than vice versa.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to ask this too because I've been thinking a lot about the direction of the show and the purpose of the show, and one
Hmm.
of the things that I want it to become is a support system potentially not only for those of us who were former homeschoolers. Sometimes we just want to talk shit about our experience. Sometimes we want to reminisce and be
Yeah.
like we've been doing, right?
Yeah.
Reminisce about stuff, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? But I also want it to be a place for people who are currently homeschooling to come and say, okay, look, I can look at people who already did it and how they ended up. Um, and so my question for you is really based on your experience now with kind of being back in the homeschool community a little bit and being there. Is there a best way, do you think, that we can support this next generation of homeschool kids?
Yeah, and I think yeah, I don't know the impression I gave off, but my guess is that if you were listening to this point so far, you would think I was pretty like close to anti-homeschooling or don't think it's a good idea. That is not my stance. I am critical. I would say like if you were to ask me about the public education system, it'd be a different conversation. I tend to be pretty critical of a lot of things. But I would say like I think you can totally do it
Mm-hmm.
well, homeschool. I would say if I would remove one thing from the vocabulary of all the families and the culture of homeschooling, I remove the negativity of the public education and private system out of the vocabulary. Because not that you shouldn't have an understanding, like I just said earlier, like criticalness of what is out there, but when you position yourself as better than or more caring parents than or a better education than or safer than, I tend to think that creates a lot of elitism in those who are successful, which is its own emotional immaturity, or it creates a very big sense of failure when that is not successful and you can no longer homeschool and you have to go back to public school. You feel like you've given up and lost. Like at the end of the day, emotionally healthy parents having emotionally healthy relationships with their kids, regardless of where they go to school, is going to be the biggest impact on their success and future in life. Are almost nothing. I would almost stake my whole claim in that.
Yeah.
So if you think the school system is going to save you or hurt your kid, if you think homeschooling is going to save you or save your kid or hurt your kid, I think you got to look in the mirror first, and that is what is most important. And so take away this elitism of like, well, we just really care about our kids, and that's why, or we just really like they're terrible there. I'm like, anybody can learn how to deal with anything, and anybody can thrive in anything. Like, is your are you present as a parent? Do you care? Do you like your kids? And are you involved, or are you going to use either one as an opportunity to either have an unhealthy relationship or step away?
Yeah.
That to me is like the message that I would be questioning. And so I think like homeschooling today, perfectly fine. Like if you feel like it's great fit for your family and what you want to do it. There's so many good things that come from that. If you want to be involved in the public school system, be involved and do it. Just don't think either one's going to save or hurt you.
This is something I shout from the rooftops all the time on the show. Like anybody who's listened to any number of episodes has probably heard me say like I I think the kids learn a variety of different ways, and I think if you want to
Yeah.
be a good parent, you got to find the way that works for your kid, and then you got to be the strongest advocate in whatever arena that is. So it could be homeschooling, public school, private school, any
Hmm.
whatever it is. Charlie's backing me up, and Charlie's actually a professional, people. So it's not just some random dude on the internet shouting it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Like, this is somebody who's actually like working with families to help them do that. Like, I appreciate you for doing that, and family therapy is much needed, I think, in our world today. Like, so so thank you for what you do. Just first and foremost, thank you
I
for
appreciate it.
that. There's so many other ways and arenas we could take it and go, but I think you just said it beautifully, and maybe we do a part two at some point. But uh,
Yeah.
is there anything else you want to leave? Anything that's come up while we've been talking where you're like, oh hey, this memory has struck me, or this thought, or whatever? Is there anything else that we're missing before we close it out?
Oh man. I think I would just emphasize what I just said, maybe with a different word, help boil it down to even simpler ideas. Like I just think humility is super key in as a parent, especially as you look outward to other institutions or families. Um, there's a lot of factors as you get into family therapy that make things very complicated. And while there are solutions, humility is a very important cloak to wear in that process. And I think being humble parents makes you better parents
Yeah.
and allows you to not go down that road of either of that kind of emotional immaturity that we talked about. So that'd be my boil it down to one word. I think it's really important to have that perspective.
Very cool. I love it. Okay. Where can people connect with you?
I think Instagram is my first name, which is Charles underscore Irving, which is Irving. I'm going
Okay.
to confirm that to make sure that is the case. Yes. And if you type in Charlie Monroe, that name may also come up too. But Instagram is the best place to find me, get a hold of me.
Okay.
Um,
He's got some funny
if you want to
reels.
talk more. Yeah. They're from an old era that I'll probably not be replicating, so you can cringe with me.
Yeah.
But
Hey.
man, I posted a lot during COVID.
eh,
That's when everybody became
Yep.
real and TikTok makers.
Yeah. Hey, we've all got cringy stuff on the internet, you know? I have a friend who
Yeah.
keeps threatening. I have a whole movie from high school that we made with music video and behind the scenes
Same.
and all that stuff. That I have a friend who keeps threatening, we're going to drop it. We're going to drop it on the internet someday. Um, so that's out there somewhere. But Charlie, this has been great. And yeah, if you got questions, hit him up. I'm going to link it down in the show notes as well. So if you can't find it, there'll be a link down below. Or if you want to shoot me a question, exhsclub@gmail.com or exhsclub on Instagram, TikTok, pretty much all the social platforms. But Charlie, this has been amazing. I appreciate you. Thank you again for coming on and sharing your story. And it's just fun. It's just fun to connect with other ex-homeschoolers.
Same. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Till next week. We'll see you guys. All right. Peace.